Hi, everybody. It's Andy and Josh. Welcome to our third episode of Classic Card Chronicles. It's our pleasure to introduce to you our next guest, Brian Dwyer. He is the owner of Robert Edward Auction Site, commonly known as REA. He's not only the owner of the auction, but he is also a self-proclaimed card nerd. He has an expansive knowledge in cards and collecting in general. We will get into that. And I can't wait to discuss and find out more about Brian. So without further ado, welcome Brian Dwyer.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Brian, maybe not everybody knows you, but in the collecting world, we know you, and we know you as the owner of REA. But you're also a collector. Tell us a little bit about your collecting history and how you got into this business.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like anybody doing it at this high of a level, day in and day out, has to care about what they're having passed through their hands. So, for me, I've been collecting over 30 years. I started with basic Topps cards in the early 90s as a kid. Parents got them for me for birthdays and Christmas and, special occasions. And I was hooked. I mean, I remember opening up 92 Topps and seeing Cal Ripken and all the guys of that era. And I loved it. And I sorted them by team, sorted them by player, sorted them by stats and number. I mean, there were a million different ways to do it. And then I just got hooked. And then it was like a thing that everybody knew I was the baseball card kid. And they'd get me cards. They'd show me cards. They'd want to buy cards from me. They'd want to trade cards with me. So it goes back to the early 90s, and I've never really waned.
What do you collect now? Where's your collection gone?
Yeah, so I mean, I started building sets. When I was in high school, I joined an online community of card collectors that only traded. There was no selling allowed. You'd have to trade. And if you couldn't trade, they would do what they called random acts of kindness. And so they would send, like, if they knew that I was building a 72 top set, they might send me 10 commons. Doesn't cost a lot of money, but it was kind of that pay it forward system. So I was building sets through the mail, and I aspired initially to, building from my birth year on was super easy. They were all available in box sets. And then I aspired to complete 1970 on, and then I aspired to complete 1960 on, and then ultimately 1952 on. And so by the time I was in college, I had gotten complete minus a couple big cards, 52 Mantle, a couple other, Mays cards, Robinson cards, stuff like that. But ultimately, Topps was my first introduction to cards and my first basis for collecting. Then when I was out of college and I was working at SGC, I started getting more and more exposed to the old stuff. And so I started collecting tobacco cards, started collecting Gaudies, 19th century. One of the first cards I ever bought was an N28 Anson, T206 Cobb. I mean, I bought a T206 Cobb in a 6, probably 12 years ago now.
Which pose was that? Do you remember? Of course you remember.
Redback. Yeah.
Nice.
Still have it, actually.
Which one was it?
It was the red background.
Oh, awesome.
I wish I still had my green background, which was in a 5.5. That was a dynamite card.
So it was a graded PSA 6 red Cobb. And do you remember what you paid for it?
About $2,900.
And this was what year?
It's probably on VCP. I bought it out of another auction. It was probably 10-ish, 11 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay. I mean, it's amazing how you went from 92. Was 92 the first year you remember collecting?
Yeah, I was 6 years old, and it's the first most vivid memory I have of baseball cards. And I don't know if it was a birthday, if it was a Christmas, I don't know what it was. But yeah, 92, I have distinct memories of sorting that set every which way.
Nice. So how did you go from, was it 92 and then all of a sudden you said something when you started collecting and making sets that you were back into the 70s. So what made you get into those?
So there were really two drivers. When I was about 13 years old, so that would have been 99, my best friend's dad was cleaning out his childhood home, and he came to me with a shoebox full of 50s and 60s cards. And that was my first real exposure to vintage. I had a couple 52 Bowman Brooklyn Dodgers cards that my dad had gotten somewhere, but that was the first time that I saw like 500 or 1,000 vintage cards. So he knew that I was a baseball card collector. He wanted me to help him sell it. He wanted me to figure out what he had. And I joined PSA. So I've been submitting cards to PSA now for almost 25 years, and got a bunch of stuff graded, started selling it on eBay for him. He paid me a commission, which was my first real taste of the business side of things. And so that got the wheels turning. But then my grandmother was actually big into yard sales. And I distinctly remember her coming home and giving to me Ziploc baggies full of 70s commons that she would find in like a quarter box at a garage sale or something. So those two things were in my early teenage years, and that's what really got me hooked on vintage.
Sweet.
Can you talk about where your collection's at now, specifically your baseball collection?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty happy with my baseball card collection. I've got most of those sets that I built, 15, 20 years ago. I've got those tucked away. I've gotten into a lot of the blue chips, and I've kept a lot of them. So N28, I have an N28 set that's all graded. I have a bunch of Cobbs and Wagners and Ruths and Gehrigs and stuff like, the big name guys that I've tucked away. And then I buy stuff that catches my eye. So, I mean, I bought a Ruth autograph. I bought a Gehrig autograph. Little things that catch my eye that keeps me interested. But I joke to people, I've got the best collection in the world every time we roll out an auction. I mean, you never know what you're going to see. Sometimes that T206 Wagners. I mean, when we sold that card for $6.6 million, I had it in my possession for a couple months. So it's really tough to beat that. Baltimore News Ruths, game used Ruth bats, which we have one coming up in our summer auction. I mean, this stuff's dynamite, and it passes through my hands all the time.
So that's what I was going to ask you about. So when we talked before, you mentioned that you did have, you have these amazing cards that come through your auction house, and it's almost like you have this collection that comes in and goes out. So it fills a void. It fills a want for baseball cards. So you've moved to other things besides baseball cards and baseball items?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody here at REA is a collector to some degree. I mean, some collect sports, some collect TCG and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards, which we've started to try and introduce into our auctions now that we have some familiarity with them. We've got a bunch of guys that collect modern. You'll see more modern showing up in our auctions now. But yeah, to your point, the building these auctions does scratch that itch of sports collecting for me. Right. So I've branched out a little bit and tried to go into areas that I think are super interesting, that I think are potentially undervalued, and also allow me to keep learning. I think back to what got me super excited about baseball cards 15, 20, 25 years ago. It was learning, and everything was new and everything was exciting. And every time I read a book, or every time I saw something posted online, or every time I got a new card, it was new and fresh and exciting. And so for me now, like I've started dabbling in historical documents. I bought a Lincoln signature. I bought a Houdini signature. I bought a Neil Armstrong signature. The Beatles. I have a photo autographed by the Beatles. I keep getting outbid on George Washington signatures, but I think that would be super cool. And then
paper. I think I know who bought that.
Yeah, paper money, $500 bills, $1,000 bills, gold eagles, silver eagles, coins.
You're touching on so much. It's funny. It's like in this one intro, I feel like you've answered almost all of our questions, so we could end it now. It's amazing. It's funny. You talk about all these different items. I certainly want to know about the $1,000 bills and the George Washington. I've certainly become more interested in, branching out into other, historical objects and memorabilia. I want to hear about all those things. I know that I just saw on Instagram, Probstein took out, I think it was on Instagram, he said, which of the following do you think is the most expensive item? One of the items was an Abraham Lincoln letter. One was $1,000 bill. And honestly, I can't remember the other few items, but those are two things that you literally just mentioned. I mean, obviously you said Washington, this is Lincoln, but I'm interested I'm sure our listeners are interested in finding out how you got to be the owner of REA, because you didn't just start out with 92 tops and jump to REA. I know there was a collections in between. How did you? I know there was another auction site in there that still exists. Tell us that and how you became this, this monster.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, growing up, 13 years old, I joined eBay. I sell my buddy's father's collection. I learn about the business side of things. I start going to shows. I'm building my own sets. Eventually, I hook up with a couple collectors, help them build their collections, meet more dealers, get familiar with grading, kind of really dive into the larger hobby. I went to school for finance and accounting, and I thought that I was going to be an investment banker. And when I graduated, the economy was in a pretty poor place. 2008 financial crisis.
Sure.
Companies were collapsing, jobs were drying up, and the last thing that anybody needed was more investment bankers. And so luckily for me, I went to school about 20 minutes from SGC's headquarters at the time. They're now in Florida. They were in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And so I reached out to them. I had a mutual connection with the owner. I reached out to them and I said, would love to get a job in the hobby, would love to get exposure. Do you have anything? They said, we don't have any full-time positions right now, but we would consider part-time or an internship. And so I think not a lot of people know this, but I worked for free at SGC for 3 months. I parlayed it into college credit my senior year. It was a work study. I had to write some papers on what my experiences were. But then that parlayed into a full-time job at SGC, where I was essentially running business development for them. I was representing them at trade shows. I was their dealer liaison. I was helping customer service. At that time, SGC was like a 10-person company. And so I got exposed to even more than I could do on my own. Loved it, met a ton of people, learned so much. I mean, at SGC, you're seeing everything come through the door. You're seeing old Judge Ansons in uniforms and Pokemon cards and 89 Donruss. You're seeing everything. And so I did that from 2007-ish, 2008 until 2010. And then in 2010, I just really missed the buying and the selling part of the hobby. I mean, I got such a rush out of breaking down collections and sending cards out for grading and all that. And in 2010, there were many, many, many less auction houses than there are today. Nobody, the Probsteins of the world, the Greg Morrises of the world, they were not big eBay presences like they are today. And it was either sell it yourself on eBay or consign it to a major catalog auction like REA. And there was no in between. And so I founded that company, Sterling Sports Auctions, which you referenced, as kind of like the perfect middle ground. Bring the auction experience to lower price point items. And I was the only person really doing it at the time. I did $1 million in sales my first year. And that kind of caught the attention of a lot of people, one of whom was Rob Lifson, who was the founder and owner of Robert Edward Auctions. And he came to me and said, see what you're doing. People like you. You've got a good following. Haven't hired anybody in 10 years, but would you consider coming aboard? And so I always tell people it was like the Yankees called and said, hey, you want to start center field against the Red Sox tomorrow? So I looked at it as a great experience. I sold Sterling Sports Auctions, which still operates today. But then I went to work for REA. And I did that for 3.5 years. I helped expand them from 1 auction to 2 and 2 auctions to 3. And then Rob came to me and said that he was thinking about retiring. And he said, essentially, do you want to work for someone that buys the company or do you want to buy the company? And thankfully, I was able to put together, the required money to buy REA. I was 29 years old, and the rest is history. So I've grown it from 2 auctions a year to last year we did 11 auctions. At that point in time, there were 3 employees. Now we're pushing 30 employees. Everybody in the past, when I bought it, was based out of New Jersey. Now we've got representatives all over the country. So it's been a great ride, and I love it, and I've just learned so much.
And is it all yours, or do you have any partners, or is it all you?
No, so I mean, it's mostly all me. I mean, it's I had a couple people that were there at the beginning that helped me get over the hump, but it's really my baby.
Interesting.
Amazing.
Was there at any point once you acquired REA, was there any specific moment that you can think of where you realized that as an auction house owner, you made it?
I mean, getting that first auction off the ground when it was mine to, spin up from scratch, basically, that was certainly a good test. Somebody hands you the keys to this dominant legacy brand in the hobby and says, "All right, good luck." When we had that first auction, that was really a special moment. And then just, I never take for granted that people trust me, trust REA. Obviously our reputation is exceptional. The service, the results, the prices. Nobody sold more Wagner's. Nobody sold more Baltimore News Ruths. These big marquee cards, people still trust us with them. And so that's great. It's a great testament to us, great testament to me, my team. I mean, we've got a really good team here. So every day I pinch myself and say, wow, you've made it. You make money selling baseball cards for a living.
So at the time that this episode airs, there's going to be big news that REA has bought Huggins and Scott Auction. Can you tell us a little bit about this acquisition and what it means for the future of REA?
Sure. Yeah, we're really excited about this acquisition. Huggins and Scott, very similar to REA, been around for decades, really strong reputation, really wide variety of items. Unfortunately, as many people in the hobby know, Bill Huggins, who founded the company, passed away unexpectedly in February. So this opportunity came to us as a result of that. The family, Bill's family, wanted to ensure that his legacy, his company, his employees, all and his clients all had the ability to continue in his absence. And so that's where REA came in. And for us, we're excited about it because it expands our footprint around the country. We have representatives on the West Coast, in the center of the country, Dallas, Chicago. Now we'll have a full staff down in the DC, Maryland area. It also gives us some more flexibility as to the types of material that we can handle. And, Huggins and Scott handles more comics and coins than we do. They've got dedicated staff member for coins and comics. So we're excited about that prospect. And, like with the Encore auctions that we added a couple of years ago, we're always looking for ways to serve the collectors more and serve their collections more. So, Huggins and Scott gives us another avenue to tackle as much of a collection as we can.
So,
Explain to us what changes in a company like Huggins and Scott when you or anyone else, you in this case, come along and you buy the company. What's going to change there?
Yeah, so the short answer is that a lot of Huggins's day-to-day will remain the same. We're going to run the two companies as separate entities. They're going to keep their location in Silver Spring, Maryland. What we're really excited about being able to offer them is some of the technological and operational and really financial resources that REA has. So they'll be able to offer cash advances in a way that they've never been able to before. They'll benefit from some of the operational and technological advances that we've made. We have proprietary systems that we'll introduce to them. We have marketing systems that we'll introduce to them. We have a lot of data and metrics that we're going to incorporate into their business. We're keeping their staff intact. They'll benefit from our network of, I mentioned earlier, Chicago, Dallas, Southern California, Northwest Seattle. We've got full-time employees in all these locations, and so they'll benefit from that. But above all, too, they'll benefit from our mailing list. And our mailing list is one of the largest in the industry, and we're excited to bring a whole new crop of bidders to them because they've been around for over 30 years, but there's still a bunch of people that either haven't heard from them or heard of them or haven't bid with them. And so even in the couple days here since we've announced it, we've registered a significant number of people for them with them for the first time. So it's all very exciting. A lot of what the outside world sees will remain the same. We'll do some updates here and there, but trying to keep things as business as usual as possible for them.
So really last question on this topic that I wanted to hit on was how do you intend to carry on the legacy of Mr. Bill Huggins and the visions that he had for Huggins and Scott auctions?
Yeah, so Bill was a real collector at heart. He got his start in the business in the 70s. He started as a card shop owner, then morphed into an auctioneer. I think Bill, very similar to me and the other people that work here at REA and at his company, we love this stuff. And so it'll be a very easy kind of meshing of cultures, which I think, the two companies, while very different, operated in somewhat the same ways. But Bill wanted to serve as many people as he could. He wanted to sell your $100,000 items and your $100 items. And for us, I think that we're looking to continue that. Eventually, we'll morph some of our catalog auctions and their catalog auctions, and our monthly auctions will come up with a schedule that's very complementary to each other. But really, by keeping the name and keeping everything as close to status quo as possible for them, we'll honor his legacy. And by adding those resources, financial, operational, technological, will ensure that Huggins and Scott stays a viable name for a very long time.
Very nice.
Cool. Your auction house, in my opinion, is the best one. There's a few that are up there. The stuff that you have seems to be top tier vintage and pre-war. Is that because that's what you're interested in, and that's what you got involved in the auctions because that was your interest, or is it because that's what you see as valuable and what's hot? How is it that you've become known for having the best vintage and pre-war stuff?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of factors. When you look back to when REA started, which was in the early 90s, modern cards at that time were from the late 80s, early 90s. They weren't worth anything. So the only cards worth really selling in an auction format were these really super old vintage cards. PSA was just getting off the ground at that time, SGC off the ground a few years later. So REA built its business and its brand on vintage baseball. And there's way less football and hockey and basketball than baseball. That being said, as the hobby evolved, as REA evolved, I always tell people you can't just go to Walmart and order up $15 million worth of cards and memorabilia because you're having an auction. So we're always at the mercy of our consigners. And every auction, we're consciously trying to go out and get stuff that's not vintage baseball and expand our client base and expand our offerings so that we're not typecast. Yes, we sell more of that stuff than anything, but we've got a Montana rookie and a PSA 10 coming up in the next auction. We've got a Vesna rookie that's over 110 years old and a PSA 4 coming up. Wilt Chamberlain rookies in an 8, Namath. I mean, we've got a Pokemon box from 1996. Like, we want that variety because we recognize that the hobby is so much bigger than just vintage tobacco cards or 19th century cards, or, we want to serve the greater hobby. And that means that we've got to diversify, but again, we're at the mercy of our consigners.
Interesting.
Right.
Something that you brought up that I found really interesting was that you have so much diversity of items. You have Pokemon cards, you have bats, you have baseball cards, football cards, etc. There's so many interesting things. Are there any items that you can think of that you found the most interesting come through the auction?
I remember one of the first items that I ever handled here were the boots worn by Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle fight. And I would love to have them back. They'd be worth a mint today. But I remember thinking how cool these were. They couldn't have been further from a vintage baseball card if they tried. But
Totally.
Here's iconic game used boots from this incredible fight from one of the greatest athletes of all time. Throughout the years, we've had so many items that tick those boxes. We've had a green jacket from Augusta. We've had Harry Houdini's handcuffs. We've had, stuff like that. Even in this auction, again, like I just keep thinking about how you never know what's going to be on the other end of a phone call. We had a guy that called us. He was a bat boy in the 1960s. He's got a game used Willie Mays glove. We get it authenticated. Turns out it's one of the best Willie Mays gloves known to exist. He's kept it buried for 50-something years, calls us up, ships it to us in a brown paper bag that he's kept it in since the 70s. And it's impeccable, remarkable surviving thing. So literally every day there's something. We have a ring from the 1958 NFL championship, the greatest game ever played, buried in a collection for 30 years. So that's why I love showing up to work. That's why I love checking the emails. That's why I love picking up the phone, because this is incredible stuff that's just coming in.
Right.
Those Houdini handcuffs, were those the last ones, or were they just anyone?
No, if I remember correctly, they were just a representative pair that, again, I'm going from memory here, but I think they originated from his family, brother, something like that. But yeah, I certainly don't think they were the last ones. I don't think they went for anything close to what the last ones would go for.
Yeah, similar to Josh's question, he asked you, anything that like really just like wows you, and I'm sure you could tell us a ton. Do you get bored is not the word. Desensitized. You're seeing Wagner's mantles in super high grade. It can't be like the first time you saw it. It's a commodity, I would think, at this point.
Well, I mean, Wagner's certainly are the exception, potentially. We have, again, we've sold more than anybody, and it's always special, lump in your throat, goosebumps, hair standing up when you get the opportunity to sell a Wagner. Am I desensitized? The short answer is no. It's not lost on me that these are very old and historic and valuable items. I think that, seeing a group of 50 T206s is maybe old hat right now for me, but I still appreciate the story. I still appreciate that it's buried out there. I still appreciate that if it's a collector that's entrusting us with them, they spent time and money learning about the set and building the collection. So I never take anything for granted. But it's hard having a conversation with somebody that thinks their 80s and 90s cards are worth money and trying to tell them, you don't understand. Like I've seen everything in this world, and I've seen so many of these. Go knock on your neighbor's doors; they have it too. It's hard to convey the experience and all that sometimes to people who, cards from 1980 are pushing 50 years old.
What was the last item? What was the last holy shit item you had? And by that meaning, like you open it up and you're literally, that's what you say.
Well, there. One item that we had in recent memory that I didn't expect to see, and I was in awe of when I saw it, was we had a blanket worn by Secretariat in the winner's circle. I think the Preakness, maybe. That to me was just, again, iconic. I mean, is Secretariat an athlete? Maybe, maybe not, but certainly a household name when it comes to sports.
Sure.
So that was cool. I mean, we've got coming up in this auction, the call came in as I have some cards that were left to me by a deceased family member. They send us pictures, fronts only.
Walter of the deceased family member or of the
No. So a guy dies, leaves his family cards. Okay. Send us pictures. They've got a bunch of T205s, T206s, T207s. T207s, we can tell there's some rare Lewis emblem, no emblem variations, no louder milk. T205s, we can see a couple Hall of Famers. T206s, we can see a couple Hall of Famers. So we know immediately that we're interested in this stuff. Send it on in. We get it. The Johnson hands at chest is a broadleaf 460. That was an oh my God moment. Anybody that was around the hobby in 2020 may have seen or been familiar with a live T206 reveal that I did. T206 set, part 1. Let's see what's inside. So you can tell that this is a really old school binder. Kind of jives with what we know about the collector. Doug, how are you? Turner, how's it going? So this collector, just as a means of background, he's passed away about a decade ago. We know that he started collecting in the 50s. So anything could be in here. Right. Going through a T206 set in the middle of the pandemic, and I find an Uzik Cobb in the binder that I had no idea was there. Let's go look, Scott. Saturday Evening Post, yep. Whoa! Oh! Ho, ho. Cobb. Ooze. Wow! Oh my God, guys. Wow. That is incredible. Unbelievable. Wow. Whew. That's the Cobb. Beautiful color. That's the back. It was there. Also had a plank. Piedmont's, sweet caps. Who sees it? Who sees it? My God, please be real. There it is. There it is. Usyk Cobb was more exciting. Stuff like that. You know, and then, I mean, again, I could go on and on forever, but we got a call from a guy a month ago, maybe. And he's like, I'm related to one of the founders of Topps. Okay, that's great. That's super cool. He says, I've got something that my grandfather left me, or my father, I can't remember. And it turns out that it's 25 original artworks from the 1953 Topps set.
Oh, wow.
The actual artworks that they used to make these cards.
So cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that set's literally known for the artwork. I mean, that is
Beautiful.
one of the most beautiful sets.
Yep.
So cool.
Yep.
You brought up something that I did actually want to hit on. I wanted to talk about some of the discoveries that you've made as an auction house owner. And you mentioned the binder in 2020. And I'll share clips of the video for people to see. But as a little summary, you got this binder of 522 cards. Is that correct?
Yeah. No Doyle.
No Doyle, no Wagner, and there was 8 Uzits. There was Cobbs, E91, Joe Jackson, Eddie Plank, Frank Chance, Lennox.
I had to fill out his set. Chance batting. Gorgeous, gorgeous card. Black Lennox.
It's incredible cards. You know, I wanted to ask you, what was your first reaction when you saw something like this? Like when you first opened up this binder?
Well, I mean, I did it all live on camera. So that was a blind reveal, which I don't think a lot of people understood or appreciated, that my reactions were completely genuine. Like when my eyes bugged out of my head on that Usyk Cobb, it was the first time I was seeing it. So that was super cool, super real. Knew that it was going to be a T206 set, didn't know that there were going to be 8 Usyks, that there was going to be broadleafs, that there was going to be a drum. So that was cool. But yeah, I mean, to your point, we're involved in a lot of discoveries. I think we are among the leaders in the industry of bringing in fresh material. You know, people sometimes say, oh, the auctions are just the same recycled stuff. I think there's an unbelievable amount of fresh material that we're bringing in. And that's exciting because every day is something new and fresh.
Yeah, you're really getting to know probably a lot of the enormous collectors too, because you're getting it from consigners who are obviously huge collectors and, you know, connected to the history more so. And then the collectors that are buying it, you're mailing it out to everybody. I was wondering if when you get these cards, you know, I know that your auction house has rules. We touched on it, how no one who works there is allowed to bid on things, very strict. Are there ever times where you're able to connect a buyer and a consigner, not through the auction, because you just know someone's been looking for this and all of a sudden it hits up and you make the buyer and the consigner, you know, even happier than had they gone through the auction. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, so it definitely does. I mean, some of the stuff that, to borrow a word that you said earlier, that's more commodity like, we just know is going to be best in the auction, because it's like, how do you choose one out of 30 guys that are looking for the same thing? Sometimes things come through here that are esoteric, that we know there's going to be one buyer for, that we know maybe a private sale is the best way to maximize value for our seller. And then other times, the seller is averse to the auction process. They don't want to wait. They don't want the uncertainty. I think a lot of people sometimes get this picture in their head of, these auctions are held in a barn somewhere, and if nobody shows up, then Andy steals everything for $10. And they don't grasp or understand or appreciate that we're shipping catalogs to more than 20 countries. We've got bids coming in from every auction, usually at least a dozen countries. We've got worldwide exposure, worldwide bidders. And like you said, everybody that's interested in this stuff generally is going to know about us if they don't already. So, the auction we've found is the best way to sell a lot of this stuff. But yeah, sometimes if it's got to be done privately, we do that.
Yeah, speaking of the auction process, and some people not being comfortable with it, I totally get that, because I don't know if Josh is consigned yet, but I know Josh has sold some items. We're in some Facebook groups together. But there's like this new technology that's been out there, and I've only been aware of it for a couple of years, but you probably know a lot about it. But it's the snipers. And I think what's really interesting, and I want to get your take on this, is that, and I did hear Golden talk about it on their Netflix thing, is that these cards don't really get sold until the last minutes. The price when there's 2 hours left is almost meaningless. And tell us a little bit about the technology and how that happens, and explain to people how it's not in a barn, people waving a little paddle, and how that creates such an influx of pricing towards the end of the auction.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that when people hear sniping, they think about the old eBay days where an item's going to end at 10 p.m. and you either manually or through a program. I mean, I remember having, I think it was Gavel Snipe. You set up a bid to execute with 2 seconds left. This way, nobody can read. And so you would see these battles at the end of an eBay auction where competing snipes come in and the price explodes from there. What we do, and what many other auction companies do, though, is we have these auctions go on for sometimes 2.5 weeks. We're taking bids from everybody in the world, right? So I tell people the universe of potential bidders is everybody in the world for 14, 16, 17 days. And then when you hit our extended bidding deadline, that universe shrinks down to just the thousands of people that have placed qualifying bids. We require that you place these qualifying bids because our consigners would otherwise be sweating it out for 2.5 weeks if everybody just waited until the last second. So sure. So requiring these early bids give us an insight into the health of the auction, give our consigners the peace of mind that what they're selling is stuff that people want. But then, to your point, during extended bidding, that's when stuff gets real. And that's where people start choosing, okay, I placed a qualifying bid on 100 items, but I only care about 10. And I've got a budget where I can only afford 5. And there's a lot of strategy, and there's a lot of, watching the clock tick down and trying to snipe it. Our system has evolved over the last 7-8 years, where we've switched the way that our auctions close. We feel good about where we're at now, in the sense that we've got that extending bidding period. We let people kind of move money around for 2 or 3 hours, and then we go into a lot by lot close, so that the auctions, there's some finality to these auctions, but also if somebody's trying to snipe you, the clock resets so that you have a rebuttal period. And so ultimately we think that gets our consigners the highest price. We estimate that more than a third, about 35% of the total sales in an auction happen in the last 3 hours.
Sure, I bet.
You've mentioned working with some other auctions and auction house owners. I was wondering what your relationship is with different auction house owners?
Yeah, so I mean, I think ultimately it's all a little bit of friendly competition. I mean, the hobby's quite large, but at the end of the day, it's also quite small. So we all know each other. We all bid in each other's auctions mostly. Uh, we've all, kind of quote unquote grown up together. I mean, I'm certainly one of the youngest people that's doing this at this level, but some people that I worked with at SGC work at other auction houses. I sold, obviously, my first company that still runs today. So there's this network of professionals where, again, I think we're all friendly competitors, but we know who each other is. We bid in the auctions. We understand that there's enough stuff to go around.
Right.
Is there a lot of that going on to that competition where that there's an item out there and that other auction houses know about that item too, and everybody wants it, and you kind of have to like make your best pitch to the consigner? Does that happen quite often, especially on monsters?
Yeah, without a doubt. So, on the very biggest items, they're usually in the hands of very savvy, sophisticated collectors, and they're gonna try and get their best deal. Ultimately, a lot of what we do comes down to relationships. And so we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that over my time in the hobby and REA's time as a company, we've forged some very strong relationships where there's loyalty to REA, there's loyalty to me as an individual or wherever I'm working. People trust the way that we'll present it, the way that we'll handle it. They come to us because they know that they've got one opportunity to sell their item and they want to get the best price for it. So yeah, there's competition on these big ones, but there's also a lot of stuff I think people would be surprised that never gets shopped around because people want to do business with REA and to be candid, they have the same allegiances to other auction houses sometimes. So we don't have a monopoly on that stuff, but I think people have this sense that everything's getting shopped and everybody's turning the screws, and there's sometimes getting more money is all people care about. And REA, we get tremendous prices. We've got a huge network of bidders. You could pay less at a smaller auction house, but get more at REA. And so I think that's what a lot of people that have been around realize.
Interesting. You mentioned some monsters that have come through the auction house, like the Wagners. I was curious, is there any one item or one sale that you're most proud of REA selling?
It's very hard not to say that $6.6 million Honus Wagner. I mean,
Right.
that's raised the bar by almost 30% for the highest price ever paid for a trading card. And it broke prices that were private sales. They had been confirmed by both parties, but I think, almost doubling up what a card had realized at auction was monumental for us, monumental for the hobby, and really kicked a lot of other stuff into hyperdrive. So I'm very proud of that. I mean, the way that we handled it, the way that we promoted it, the way that we got bidders involved who weren't in the hobby. I think people would be shocked to see what went on behind the scenes to get that done. And then, like in this most recent auction that we just concluded, we had a Clemente rookie that nearly went for $1 million. That was something that there was intense competition over getting it in the door. Want to make sure that we're delivering for our client, want to make sure that we're getting the top price possible. And we turned in an incredible result. So, I'm proud of what we do every day. I'm proud of the prices that we get, the way that we do it. But if you want me to pick one, that Wagner's going to win probably every time.
So the Wagner, that was the SGC3 that you had in Chicago?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that card, and you were letting people take pictures with it. And the Clemente that you just mentioned, I don't know of a 10. So was that a 9?
It was a 9. Yeah, I think there's 110 out there, if I remember correctly. Maybe 2, but I think 1. And yeah, so we got a 9. There are only a handful of them, but $960,000 for a 9.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of those crazy cards where it's 90% of them are off center. It's impossible to get a good grade. And when I got into finding a Clemente, grade wasn't a factor. I just need to find one that was centered, and it was impossible. And somebody told me that the Clementes, a few years earlier had gone up to like 100 grand for like eights. And obviously as the markets ebbed and flowed, it's come back. But that's a super rare high end that I didn't even see. I'm gonna go back when we're done with this and take a look. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, no, you're right. The Clemente rookie and the Banks rookies are two cards that I just think of as being very tough to find centered.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is there any one card that you haven't had in the auction yet, or at least in your years of owning the auction, that you're gonna hope to have it in the future?
Um, well, I mean, I don't know that we've auctioned a Baltimore News Ruth since I took over. There were a couple that we had sold while I worked for the company. There's one card that I think of all the time. It's a U.S. Caramel, 32 U.S. Caramel, Lindy Lindstrom. I've never seen one in person. It's a super rare card, but I think about all the rarities that we've seen, all the rarities that we've discovered, and I've never seen one of those. So, I mean, that's kind of like a white whale, and I don't even know if it's a realistic white whale, but that's one where it's like, oh, okay, if that came through the doors, that would make the lights go off.
Nice.
Yeah, that brings up another question. You see you said 32 caramel Lindy. That said, while I think it's probably always been popular. I only became aware of it maybe like 5 years ago, and I fell in love with the set, and I got a Garrick because I thought that was great. And then about a year or so ago, maybe 2 years, that Ruth just became the it card to have. Do you see these trends happening like a little bit before they happen, where you could follow the markets up and down, and you just say, "Oh, this is going to be the next thing." Do you see that a lot? It doesn't have to necessarily be with cards, but with the trends of the collectibles.
Yeah, I mean, if I could see it perfectly, I'd be retired, frankly.
Sure.
Or I'd at least have a bigger collection. But yeah, I mean, I do think that we get a sense of where the hobby's at. We look at bidding activity. We look at, what's the most viewed items, what items have gotten the most bids. I mean, we have a lot of internal metrics, which again, I think people would be surprised at some of the stuff that we measure and how it dictates what we do. But yeah, I mean, game used memorabilia, for example, I had been personally a huge advocate of that segment many years ago. I thought it was unbelievably incongruous that you could have a game used Hank Aaron jersey that was only selling for 2 or 3 times what a 54 tops and an 8 was selling for. We've seen incredible appreciation in that area now. And so like that Maze glove, people are saying 50,000, 75,000. This Babe Ruth bat that we have coming up from 1922, people are saying 500,000, 700,000. I mean, these are numbers that just would not be thought of for those types of items even 5 years ago. So that's an area that I saw a lot of potential in, and I think that's manifested.
There was just a really cool Maze glove. I think it was maybe like a month or two ago. I bid on it knowing that I was going to be outbid so early on, and it went maybe 3 times what my bid was. But are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the one that you have is far spectacular, far superior.
Well, look, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to see that other glove in person. I mean, I've read the description. Okay. A couple people who were familiar with both seem to like ours. But that's the beauty of collecting.
Sure.
I might think ours is the best. You might think the other one's the best. You're ultimately, the collectors are never wrong.
I've been wrong.
Only a couple times.
Plenty.
So, we've been talking about cards that you've seen go up. Are there any cards from your statistics that you have that you think will go up in the future that people should invest in?
I get asked this question a fair bit. I think that I think guys like Willie Mays, still has some room to run. I don't think that he has appreciated as much as the Mantles and the Robinsons, who are his contemporaries, have. I was talking to somebody the other day where I said, like, the 51 Parkhurst Gordie Howe.
Mm.
That's something that, that's an iconic hockey card. And I don't think hockey gets its, just due all the time. The
Right.
Vezina we have coming up. I mean, the Vezina card, that is one of the earliest hockey cards, very significant. They named the trophy after the guy, and
Mm-hmm.
you get a nice, respectable mid-grade for still a relatively affordable price. So,
Yeah.
again, if I could predict it all, I'd be in a very different position.
Yeah.
But those are kind of my off the cuff thoughts.
It's nice to hear you talk about the hockey, because it doesn't really get as much love. It's not America's sport, but it's certainly picked up in recent years. But you mentioned that 1951 set. What's particularly amazing about that set is it's super hard to get centered cards. So
Yeah.
you get the tons of Hall of Fame rookies in that set, Richard, and you know there's none bigger than Howe. And uh, none of these guys are alive anymore.
Yeah.
And there's some autograph cards. It brings me to like, on card autos that I remember a few years ago there was I think it was PSA. They have those little live things where if you log on, you can see them live chat on either Instagram or on their site. One guy was talking about on card autos, and I was able to ask a question if this was maybe 3 years ago, if they felt that all these new inserted autographed cards, like on card autos, would finally bring value to the on card autos that people used to say ruin the card.
Right.
Have you seen a crazy, yeah, I don't know the words, crazy influx in value in these autos that used to, people used to say ruin the card. You take uh, an Ernie Banks rookie and he autographed it. In my head, it was always that should be worth 10 times more, and somehow people said it was ruining it. So how have you seen that?
Yeah, so signed vintage cards they're another area that's exploded. I mean, signed rookie cards have really gone up. But I think, what makes a lot of these trends or significant appreciations in value possible is we have just way more data than we've ever had before. And so now we can look at something like the PSA population report and feel comfortable spending X amount of dollars because we know what else is out there. I think there was a lot of hesitation and trepidation in the past because people weren't sure, like, hey, Mickey Mantle, he was alive for a long time. He made a living at the show circuit. Yeah, maybe there's a bunch of 51 Bowmans or 52 tops out there that are signed. Now we can kind of look at the numbers and see that that's not the case, which is why these are six-figure cards. So I think that data largely has changed a lot of what we do. But yeah, I mean, we've got a 52 tops Willie Mays coming up in this auction. To your point, in the old days, people would have looked at that as a defaced card. Now it's going to sell for 4 or 5 times what that comparably graded non-signed card would go for.
Right. Josh, when we end up editing this, will you put a link to all my vintage signed rookie cards, please?
Of course. Of course. Along with
right now.
many other people that asked me to
Right.
promote some stuff for them. But something that you've been bringing up, Ryan, which I think is really interesting, is that you have this bird eye view of the hobby. As an auction house owner, I assume you kind of see everything and all the trends and what's happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're just required by nature of what we do to interact and interface with so many different types of people. Like we're on the front lines talking to grading companies, we're talking to authenticators, we're talking to big collectors, medium collectors, small collectors, we're talking to sellers, we're talking to people who are early on in their collecting process and people who are on the way out of collecting. So we're aggregating, to my data point, we're aggregating a lot of different viewpoints, and we're able to kind of get a sense of what's going on.
So with that bird's eye view, what are your thoughts on the hobby right now and where it's heading?
I think it's in a great place. I mean, I talked about metrics and I talked about data. We measure engagement, interaction, new signups, new bidders, repeat bidders, all this stuff. Our numbers for the last 3 years have been consistently up and up significantly. I mean, the influx of bidders every auction is incredible. And what we're finding is that a lot of them are new to the hobby. It's not like they've been floating around there and they haven't been familiar with REA. We're very fortunate that we're a very well-known company, but these are people who are consciously deciding to start putting money into this industry. So that's very encouraging. That's very exciting. I think I might feel differently if our business was built on modern cards only. But, we're a vintage company by and large. They've been very strong. And, when you look at just even outside of REA, so many of the record sales, both all time and even on grade by grade or card by card basis, they've come within the last 18 to 24 months. So there's a lot of new blood. There's a lot of serious interest in the hobby. We're not seeing this widespread decline or bursting bubbles. We're actually seeing a very good trajectory, I think, long-term for the bread and butter of the industry.
You mentioned metrics a ton. Two-part question. Tell us a little bit more of the type of metrics that you follow. And has this become more of a technological company and industry? And then second part of the question is, with all the metrics that you have, are you able to tell, towards the end of an auction, where about cards and memorabilia are going to end up based on certain metrics that you have? It could be number of bids. And a third part to that is, are you able to see people's highest bids, their max bids? So all that.
So I'll work backwards. The answer is unequivocally no, we cannot see anybody's high bids. It's not an option in our software. We can't even see whether or not you've placed a high, like a max bid. So all your bids are placed in confidence and they're unbeknownst to us. As far as are we able to predict, where a card or an item might end up, we don't generally predict on an item by item basis. We might say, oh, that Maze glove, $50,000, $55,000, $60,000 would be great, or that might be where it's pacing. But we use our metrics as like an overall prediction of where the auction as a whole will end. What are we pacing for as far as bidders? Where are we pacing as far as gross sales? How many more bids might we expect to come in? And that all that just keeps us honest and working hard. If we're forecasting that bidder engagement's going to be down, 10% compared to the last auction, we're going out and we're mobilizing even harder than we all already are, trying to get people involved. As far as what we're tracking, I mean, we're tracking bids, we're tracking bidders, we're tracking page views, we're tracking new bidders, new signups, repeat bidders, stagnant bidders, reactivated bidders, all this stuff, because our job is to get our sellers the most money. And the more information that we can get, the more predictive power that we can have, and the more we can say, okay, Andy collects within this range of material. Let's contact Andy about this, or let's, show Andy these cards. The better that we can be for our sellers. I think that people would be shocked to come into REA in the last 72 hours of an auction and see how much we're mobilizing to get bidders. We're putting direct links in front of bidders because we know what they're interested in. We know they haven't bid. We know that they've bid on stuff and haven't bid on this yet. Are they waiting? Are they not interested? Did they not see it? We're having conversations. We might make couple thousand phone calls and emails in the last 72 hours.
Interesting. So kind of starting to wrap things up here. I heard that REA is going to be setting up in the National this year.
Yeah, we're going to have actually a pretty big display. We'll be in the corporate section of the National this year. Big booth, bring in hundreds and hundreds of items from this summer auction. It's going to be about a 3,000 lot auction. So we'll have probably 25-30% of the auction with us. We're going to be bringing that Maze glove. We're going to be bringing the Ruth bat. We're going to be bringing some cards that we haven't even announced yet that I think will blow people's socks off. And then,
do you want to announce one of them here?
If we film this next week, I would be able to.
Okay.
You'll see some.
Well, this won't be released till a little after next week, so maybe you can give us a little sneak peek.
Well, I got to keep something for myself. So,
Okay.
But you'll see some pretty cool announcements either in the near future from REA or in the near past that we're pretty excited about. But at this year's National, we're doing something that we've never done before. which is we're having Dick Perez at our booth. And so Dick Perez is the artist of the Perez Steel postcards, the Donruss Diamond Kings. We've worked with Dick for 10 years now, selling paintings and helping him advertise his works. He's going to be the subject of a documentary next year about the Diamond King series. And he's done a painting of Roberto Clemente that we're going to be auctioning off to benefit the Roberto Clemente Foundation.
That's
so
sweet.
Dick Perez will be at our booth. We'll be talking about his paintings. He'll be showing off his paintings. He'll be signing autographs. So yeah, anybody that's at the National should be sure to stop by. You'll see some incredible stuff.
Will you be displaying any of your 1992 tops that you started collecting?
You know,
Everyone wants to know.
I still have them. I still have them in a Tupperware bin in my basement, but I'm hoping that one day they'll be really valuable. But no, we won't have any.
Keep holding.
We will have we'll have some great modern cards. We've got some great, again, kind of bringing this full circle. People think we're all vintage baseball, but we're gonna have Pokemon. We're gonna have all the major sports. We've got some soccer cards. We've got some really, really cool stuff coming up for auction.
Will we be able to try on the Maze glove and swing the Ruth bat? Is that a promo?
Insurance will not let us do that, but we can carefully take it out of the case for you to inspect.
That's cool.
All right, I'll take you up on that.
You did say that there's a variety of memorabilia. I think on a call you told us once one of your prized possessions. You want to tell us what that was again? Do you remember what I'm talking about? It's something that you bought recently. It's not a card. Remember what you were telling us about?
Oh yeah. So I just bought my first comic book. So
tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an area where, again, we touched on it earlier in the call. What drew me to baseball cards was learning and this insatiable desire to learn and become the best collector that I could be, and ultimately parlay that into a job. And so, I do see a ton of cards. We sell 50,000 items a year. So I'm always looking to scratch that collecting itch. And delving into comics is a new area for me to just constantly learn and meet new people. And so I bought a Spider-Man, first appearance of Spider-Man, that I'm very pumped about. And I hope that this means there's more comics, not only for me, but for future REA auctions, because I do feel like there's a lot of crossover in card and comic collectors.
Definitely.
Okay. So 2 things. One, do you have the comic book there?
I think it's handy. Yeah, stand by.
Oh, let's see it.
Okay. All right. So let's see that.
Such a great comic.
I think it's here. He knows it's there.
Well, the question is it in my safe, or is it
next.
Wow.
on my desk? So,
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
And then here,
That's pretty cool.
Also, 2 things I'm happy to have: payroll checks from Ruth and Gehrig.
Oh, no way.
Oh, wow. Are those in the auction, or are those yours?
These are my personal collection. So
Okay.
this is a 1922 payroll check from Babe Ruth, where the Yankees
That's amazing.
deducted $415 in hospital and doctors expenses that they fronted Ruth. And then Gehrig check is from 1930, and it's a bonus that he earned.
Unreal. All right, so I think this will be my final question, unless Josh lets me have 10 more. Top 3 to 5 baseball cards you own right now.
So let me think about this. I've owned 52 mantles in almost every grade from 1 to 7 at one point in my life. And I've kept them. I've sold them all, except for the PSA 1, which was the first one that I ever owned. I bought it in a national 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. So that's up there. I still have that red Cobb in a 6 that I love. I have an N162 Anson that I think is just one of the most beautiful cards ever made. E93 Cobb in a 5. I just love the background of that. And then I have a Bobby Orr rookie in a 6.5 that I think is just really cool. It's a nice looking card. Again, is
it a test or is it a regular issue?
Stand by.
All right. Nice.
And you'll see his whole collection today.
It's a test.
Nice.
It's it. You know, it's funny. I have that exact same card. After we're done, I'll send you a picture of it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's one of the cards that I don't think people talk about it enough. That's amazing. And what?
Yeah.
Keep going.
So, it's I'm just looking. I've just been doing some rearranging and inventorying, and I just happen to
Want to
have
turn
these
the
out. So,
turn the camera a little bit so we can see that shelf you're looking at.
well, I'm embarrassed by how it looks, but anybody that
Okay, I
wants
get
to know,
that.
we can talk about it.
That
But
I
yeah,
totally
I
understand.
love this stuff. I mean, you started off by introducing me as a card nerd, and that's what I am. That's what brings me to do this. I think that's what makes me a good auctioneer too. It's like I collect this stuff. I know how passionate people are when they're bidding and buying and that they want to add it to their collection. And then when they want to sell, like I get the feeling of letting go of something that has been in your collection for a long period of time. And I think it makes me it makes me a better it makes me better at what I do. I understand where people are coming from. These are not widgets. These are cards, and I appreciate it, and I can put myself in their position.
So, um, some final thoughts is that you mentioned earlier that you're 37 years old, right? So you're a young collector. You still have a lot of time ahead of you to make more progress with REA, build up your collection. Do you have any future goals from where you're at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I every year I want to grow REA. I think that what we do here is the best in the industry. I think the variety of material, the quality of the material, the results. I think our catalog's the best in the industry. I think we've assembled a great team, and I just want to keep spreading that word. I want to expose it to more bidders. I want to have more sellers that we can show how great we do for people, and I want to expand. I half jokingly mentioned comics, but I think there's a lot of crossover. And I would love to be in a position where, you never want to take on something that you don't understand. And so if we're
Right.
going to branch out, it's got to be done right and it's got to be done thoughtfully. But I just really think that we've got a great product, and I just want to keep offering that to people.
Do you have any personal future goals?
Keep working at REA. I mean, I love doing what I do every day. And then, when collecting, I just like to collect stuff that's interesting. I like to collect stuff that's conversational. We were talking beforehand. I have a $500 bill and $1,000 bill. I actually bought my first $500 bill on the floor of the National in Chicago one year. I was walking down the aisle and I see this in a showcase and immediately caught my eye because it was unlike anything else that I had seen in the show. And I spent 20 minutes talking to the dealer. He educated me on, a whole bunch of stuff, cut me what at the time seemed like a good deal, and in retrospect was a very good deal. And I got it from him. I didn't even have to cash on me. I had to write a guy a check. He took it based on the fact that I used to work at SGC, and he would know where to find me. And now the rest is history. So I just like interesting stuff. I always want to be learning. I always want to be passionate. If I'm not passionate about this, then it's time to reevaluate.
Definitely. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah. And what advice would you give to other fellow young collectors that are looking to both branch their collections out to try different new things and also to work their way up in the hobby like you did?
So, I mean, I always tell people collect what you like. So, I think a lot of times you can fall into the trap of social media or message boards or whatever the case may be, where people say, "Oh, you're like this is terrible. This is going to go down. This is a sinking ship." And it's like, look, if that's what makes you happy, then that's what collecting's all about. And so I always tell people collect what you like, and beyond that, buy the best that you can afford, because you will get paid back in spades.
Right.
Um, if you can buy a 5 instead of a 3, I would always go out. I mean, it's just a proven recipe. And then I tell people, don't buy anything that has an asterisk with it. If you need to explain to somebody what makes something special, why it's valuable, why they should care, oh, ignore this hole in the card, ignore this qualifier, you've already lost them. So buy stuff that's easily digestible, buy stuff that, if you need to sell it, it's fairly liquid, but ultimately just have fun. And your other question was growing in the hobby. I mean, look, 16 years ago, I offered to work for free. And times have changed now. I don't think anybody could get away with letting somebody work for free, but the point and the principle remains the same. Like, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. At SGC, when SGC had a registry, I was the guy that was typing from the standard catalog all 792 cards in the 1992 top set. It had to be done line by line, very manually. And that's what I did for months. So I also got exposed to the conversations that people around me were having on the phone. I also got to go to trade shows. I also got to poke my head into the grading room. I got to poke my head into the slabbing and encapsulation room. I learned millions of dollars worth of stuff,
Right.
even though I was working for free. So, soak up everything that you can, read, be curious, make friends, pick their brains. And if you want to work in the hobby, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, because if you're good at it, it'll come. I mean, again, 16 years ago, I don't think I'd own one of the best auction houses for what we do.
Amazing. Two things I want to say in closing. One, the advice that you gave is such great advice. It's one thing that you said. Josh and I actually discussed this morning. Josh had showed me a card he wanted. It was an amazing card, but it had like an asterisk. And I said, you're inheriting someone else's problem. Wait for something better. Love that advice. The other thing I just want to disclaimer, I know sometimes you can see us typing here and there. For you and for the viewers, you're such an amazing guest that we're constantly saying, I have a question. I have a question. I have a question. So we're both going, me. It's like texting each other. And that was the biggest challenge, is that you kept sparking such an interest in us in new ideas and new questions that we both had 50 more questions than we had planned on asking you.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I'm happy.
Thank you.
I love this stuff. Like, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I love what I do. I love doing it for people. We make dreams come true sometimes, and that's cool. I mean, we're not solving world issues. We're not curing cancer, but for some people, we're doing very important work, and that's what I love.
And for most people who are going to watch this, you're like living a dream. I mean, it really is to see what you see, to hold the cards and the memorabilia that you are able to hold. It would be a dream for me. That's for sure.
Pretty cool.
And I think we touched on it earlier, but the reason why people like REA and the reason why people like you so much is because you are a card nerd. Like you said, you're a collector, you love cards, and you enjoy what you do. So it makes REA a great business, and everybody loves it. So we appreciate it.
No, I'm glad. And what you guys are doing, I mean, I know that I'm guest number 3, maybe technically guest number 4, but this is your 3rd episode. And, I love what you guys are doing, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
We appreciate it. It was,
Thanks, Brian.
It was an absolute pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm always down to talk. So anybody wants to reach out, you know where to find me, robert.auctions.com.
Awesome.
All right, we look forward to your auction. We're going to see you at the National. Your next auction, you said, was July 14th, I believe it was.
July 24th. Yeah.
July 24th. Okay.
It'll launch the week of the auction. So you'll be able to see on Monday what's up for sale. Come to the National Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, see it all. And catalogs will be out a couple days later.
If I could have bids in already, I would.
We'll have a couple things for you.
Nice.
Cool.
Well, thanks,
Awesome.
Brian.
Thanks,
Appreciate
man.
it. Yep.